I grew up in a very kind of conservative, very religious bubble, so to speak, where in Omaha only. I was really only like exposed to like one culture, one way of living. When I got to college and met lots of other people from different backgrounds, different experiences, I just started thinking more critically about some of the viewpoints I had, some of the things that I previously believed. It was an amazing experience. It taught me a lot about myself and a lot about just the world. And I think after that is really when I came back and started working on this film. The film gives about as positive of a message as it can. No matter if you disagree, you got to still try to connect with people.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by director and producer Nick Beaulieu, who recently made the documentary My Omaha. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks so much for having me.
I guess my first question is, this documentary, it has sort of two parallel things happening in it, but one of the big ones is you and your father's relationship. I'm wondering, you know, was there a worry when you started to involve your dad that it might tear you guys further apart or put more of a divide between you guys?
Well, I didn't really know what to expect when we first started filming, but I kind of knew that we didn't have much to lose because we really were not talking very much in the lead up to making the film and his diagnosis with cancer. And also, um, his diagnosis was so tragic and it kind of like installed a sense of urgency in both of us to reconnect that I kind of trusted that even if we started filming, we were going to retain that. So I think instinctually I kind of knew how to keep things on track and not let it become a divisive thing. But it's always touch and go because when you're trying to be both a filmmaker and also a son, sometimes there's competing things going on where something you might want to film, but you really shouldn't, or what have you. So I just tried to balance that as best as I could, and fortunately, he was pretty understanding of that.
Well, one of the things, like, there's this one moment where you both sort of set aside your differences and sort of acknowledge like that you love each other. And it's like one of the best sort of moments because you've done such a nice build up to that of like the relationship and everything around it. But you know, it like I'm wondering right now, like when you think about the world that we're currently in, um, I think about a lot of what I see from like the MAGA group is sort of a I guess like a delight or a happiness in seeing someone else being hurt. So I'm wondering how we get another side to listen to us or to work with us when there's a large group of them, not all of them, but a large group want to hurt people.
It's a good question. I think what helps combat that is when a relationship or an interaction becomes interpersonal or in person or just something beyond the online, because I think that's where it really becomes like this thing where people feel like they have a past to be really brutal, and to relish in people's suffering. But like if you are with someone in person and you say something so mean that they start crying, it's like, and unless you're like a sociopath, like that's gonna affect you and that you're gonna learn from that. Or you're just not gonna be like willing to rise to that sort of, or I guess lower yourself to that sort of level when it's more of a personalized thing. I think the internet has really done a weird job of like in some ways connecting everyone, but at the other time like making everyone feel like there's this like separation where um where manners and decency are not no longer abided by.
Mm.
So I think that that's part of like the challenge is when it comes to like the current political divide. I think people need to in real life and in person need to spend more time together. It's also like kind of one of the messages that Leo says in my film
Hmm.
is, that, the key to really understanding other people is just spending time together in a non-manufactured way, but just in an authentic way. And so that's what I hope can happen.
I've been a camera person for 30 years and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
Well, it's interesting that you talk because you talk about the social media and you're saying it's sort of it almost gives you this protective layer to sort of be like, yeah, I can be a jerk because I don't see them. But like one of the things that I'm wondering is like how do we it's sort of like I heard a person once say that social media is like a Pandora's box. It brought us all together in the sense of we could see each other, but it also brought in like terrible, we can be terrible to each other, brought in propaganda, all this stuff. How do we can't, the cat's out of the bag, so how do we combat this? How do we work as a society to fix this issue?
I wish I had the answer.
Yeah, it's
You
the
know,
worst question to
I,
ask because it's like, how do
yeah.
we fix the problems? But
Well, it's kind of like the question of our time. I think, um, you know, to be honest with you, like I think a lot about the mainstream media and how it's being undercut by social media. And as someone who studied journalism, I think that it really disturbs me because essentially what it's implying is that journalists or people who study the art and the practice of like legitimate fact finding and storytelling are not valued anymore. And I think that's heartbreaking because that is truly how information like accurately gets put out into the masses, and how people are held accountable in positions of power. And all these things are being devalued at the expense of what people think can be replaced on social media where everyone has a microphone. So I think that somehow journalists and journalism like needs to find a way to restore its sense of faith by the public, and restore its credibility, even though I don't really think it's to blame. I mean, I think it's the people in power have, kind of unfairly chastised it. But I think the media has a role to play to adapt and find ways to, regain some of that trust and relevancy, because that to me will help the issue, which is that everyone can say whatever they want online. It goes unchecked. You know, no one's accountable. I mean, they're all the sites right now are they're taking away their moderations and their teams that were, checking things. So I think that is a way to try to counter it.
so you mentioned you went to journalism school. And one of the things I found fascinating in this doc is your arc as the storyteller, in the sense of like you started out when you were young as a young Republican, and then you've sort of evolved to become, a journalist, but also like someone who sees the world very differently. I'm wondering, like, what was it about your journey? Like, how did you sort of make this transition? Because you talk about it in the very briefly in the film, but not as thoroughly.
I would say going to college just opened up my worldview a lot from what I had grown up in. I mean, I grew up in a very kind of conservative, very religious um, bubble, so to speak, where in Omaha only, I just grew up only in Omaha. I went to Catholic schools until high school. And so I was really only like exposed to like one culture and like kind of one like way of living, so to speak. And when I got to college and met lots of other people from different backgrounds and different experiences and stuff, like I just started thinking more critically about sort of
Mm.
some of the viewpoints I had and some of the some of the things that I previously believed. A big, I think, catalyst also was I interned on a documentary in college that took me out to Los Angeles. That was my first time, really spending a lot of time outside of Omaha. And it was a Korean project, so all the students were international. I was in Koreatown, so constantly immersed in a different language and a different culture. And I mean, it was just so it was an amazing experience. It taught me a lot about myself and a lot about just the world and how vast it is. And I think after that, it is really when I came back and started working on this film. And so I think those are the factors that led to it, was the opportunity to meet a lot more people from different walks of life. And I think that that's not rare. I think that happens to a lot of people, that the more you're able to travel or have exposure to people from different walks of life, you kind of develop a broader sort of point of view.
You take your dad, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the event that you take him to, but I think Leo's involved, where it's a group of African Americans and white people, and they're sort of educating and sharing experiences. Um, and one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching that, because I've had similar things where I've been talking to people who are very sort of entrenched in their viewpoints. And, for example, I'm in Canada, and I think about we've had a significant issue with schools for Indigenous people and things that we've done to them in our past. And a lot of people here, when you bring it up, tend to be very much like, well, that wasn't me, that was people 50 years ago, 60 years ago, right? Um, and I'm wondering if, and I apologize if this is a terrible question, but I'm wondering if the way social media or the way we ask or the way we sort of um, present information, I guess, uh, puts puts people on the right side back up against the wall. So I think about that where it's like, look at all these terrible things that are happening, and but usually it was presented in like the dominant culture has done this and you're a part of the dominant culture. And so there's sort of this like, whoa, wait a second, I didn't do that. And it sort of entrenches them. Is there like, do we have to change how we're approaching the conversation?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I think uh, even when I started kind of getting involved in this work, it was a question I asked myself, was like, hold on, like, is there, um, am I being made to feel guilty for this
Mm.
system or this history, And I think that um, after spending more time, I was able to realize that, like, you know, you can kind of separate like the very righteous and justified anger and frustration from the marginalized community towards, white people or people that have historically had like all of the power, and not take it personally, and also recognize that like there's some historic complicity. Um, yeah, I think that it's probably a better question for the people creating the curriculum and really specific to these issues, like um, because it is I do think that there are ways that you can adjust the content to be more inviting to people
Mhm.
who might not naturally come to that stuff. It's like you kind of hate to like pander to someone's like you know fragility, but I mean, for the greater good, it's
Yeah.
probably for the best. But from a just as a filmmaker, I think it's probably a better suited thing to figure out from someone who is like a real expert on the social issues.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Well, and I guess that goes back to what you were saying before, where it's like online, we all have a microphone as opposed to the experts. I found not an interview, like a presentation that you were doing, and in it you talk about, or like, and I'm just using the phrase you used, but like what is today's morally ambivalent thing to do? I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that and sort of, because it is a really interesting thing to have discovered when I found it.
Yeah, so I gave a presentation at a church, while we were fundraising for our film, and they wanted me to present on anti-racism, and as I was like trying to kind of think about how to present a topic or discussion point, it just dawned on me that like the issues of the here and now, like collectively people don't have the clarity to understand what those are, or like how they might be complicit, until you actually have historic context. And the reason that dawned on me was by watching the old classic film A Time for Burning, which was a documentary that took place in Omaha that was about a white church's attempt to integrate with a black church, and essentially like the fact that they failed. And when you watch that, with 50 or 60 years of context, you look at it and you're like, wow, like how could they have gotten this wrong? Like how did this go so badly? Why was this so hard? But if any of us were born then, it would have been a similar situation where we would have been grappling with these issues most likely. And so I think about, okay, well then in the present moment, are people 50, 60 years from now going to look at the way that we're acting now when it comes to the present issues, like any kind of disparity that you can name, whether it's, pertaining to violence or education or poverty or whatever, segregation, and our inability to talk about it, or our inability to make inroads with it, are there people in the future that are going to look at that and be like, wow, I can't believe they weren't able to figure this out? That's what I think that moral ambiguity is basically when there seems to be a problem, or some people are telling you there's a problem, but because there's not consensus, people don't know, or they struggle to buy into it. And I think what I was trying to do was encourage people to make a decision based on that history, and know that, okay, it might be uncomfortable right now, it might not be the consensus, or people might not be obvious to everyone, but like if you just think about the precedent here, it helps inform how to kind of think about what our present day issues are without having all of the context that history awards you.
You also, if I'm not mistaken, you have a thing called Documentary Omaha, which is a community organization. Can you tell me a bit about that? How people can get involved if they want?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So, I started an organization called Documentary Omaha, and the mission is just to advance the art and education of documentary filmmaking for people in Omaha and in Nebraska. And it was inspired by the fact that I found while making my film that there were not very many local resources when it came to documentary filmmaking. Most of the professionals I was working with were in other cities. You know, I had to find information online or elsewhere when it came to, you know, everything about making a film, from budgeting to equipment to hiring practices. There just wasn't like anyone I could go to in Omaha to get help. So I wanted to just start something that could be a resource. And so the first thing we did was I hosted a workshop on personal doc filmmaking, and invited other people who had made autobiographical stories. Um, it was amazing because I think it was like 8 or 9 people attended the workshop, and we were able to really just dive deep on how to make a film. You know, I kind of walked people through a genre and talked about high level stuff and kind of in the weeds stuff, and people really liked it. And I was able to get a grant to make it a free event, which is important. And so those are the kind of things I'm hoping to do with it. Is have more workshops. Um, I would love one day to create like a film fund. There is no actual grant opportunities that are specific to filmmakers in Omaha. And so I would love to be the first to do that. And like we just earlier this week, we did a Zoom call, kind of a virtual event with a filmmaker named Charles Fairbanks who has roots in Nebraska, just to spotlight someone who's doing great work. So yeah, the idea is to create community where there really wasn't any.
No, you know, you were, if I'm not mistaken, you were wrapping this up as Trump gets in again or got in again. Um, how I'm wondering how, because you know, in the doc you sort of show your struggles with your dad passing, but then there's this sort of, I guess I don't want to say evil, but like dark cloud that sort of appears as you're also wrapping up your doc. How did you tackle that and make sure you took care of your mental health?
Most of the editing we did was during the Biden years, you know. In fact, what was really interesting is that the very first serious editing we did, which was to make a sample, was during it was like during the week that January 6th happened, like the you know, storming of the Capitol, which was such a dark day. Um, so all through making the story, I kind of thought or hoped that America had moved on from Trump, because Biden was elected, and you know, a lot of people thought that Trump was going to get prosecuted for some of the crimes that happened. And so like last year when I realized that the election was actually becoming tighter and tighter, I was starting to like really wonder, okay, what is this going to mean in a world where we might have another Trump presidency? And I think sadly, you know, it makes the film much more relevant and much more useful actually, because the feedback I keep getting from people is that it just really hits close to home. You know, there are so many people that have a relationship that mirrors the one that my dad and I had, where it's like these immovable pieces. So, you know, it's really kind of, uh, I guess, you know, we're adapting to the moment, because I think, saw that this film was more so going to be like a depiction of the past rather than something so representative of the, you know, present moment that continues on. And um, if anything, I think that the film gives about as positive of a message as it can, um, for this topic, which is that, you know, no matter if you disagree, you got to still try to connect with people.
You talk about, you know, the two immovable objects, but I do think it's important to point out the silver lining, or the you know, bright side of things, I guess. And that is that the two of you, your dad and you yourself, were both coming from a place of love. Like he was wanting you because he was worried about you, and you were worried about him. And so it was this sort of like interesting that, like you said, it's immovable, but there was so much love there. And that was, I think, a really good element that you brought back in your film. I do want to end on a lighter note, just so it's not a
Yeah.
super dark thing. So, uh, you know, what would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Oh, I think that I don't do a good enough job of actually watching stuff out of guilty pleasure to like decompress. I always gravitate towards like the heavy, dark stuff. But
Yeah.
I will say, while making my film, I started watching King of the Hill.
Oh, it's a great show.
It's so good, and like I actually kind of hate calling it a guilty pleasure because it's actually so brilliant. Like it's
Yeah.
a smart show, and
The last couple of years we can say is a guilty pleasure.
yeah, I don't think I've gotten that far,
Yeah.
and they're actually like, I think gonna reboot it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I've that to me was like I would, this was like during the pandemic. I wasn't really working on or making money rather. I was just doing the film. It was
Yeah.
stressful. My dad was sick. So I would have these really tough days, but I knew I could turn on King of the Hill and for 30 minutes I could laugh and and kind of unplug and it was smart. It was like smart
Yeah.
humor. And I really love that show. And it's like also as someone from Midwest America, Texas is kind of its own thing, but the fact that it took place somewhere like that was cool. So King of the Hill for me is a special show. I have like a picture of the four guys actually in my apartment that I keep on the wall, just because that show kind of in that moment had a special place for me.
Well, what's interesting about it is it's similar to what I was just saying about you and your dad is like Hank doesn't understand Bobby, but he loves him and he wants the best for him. And it's the same, like so it's very interesting. I want to thank you for allowing me to interview today. It was very a fantastic doc. Um, and that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com and of course on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.